Welcome everyone back to our second vodcast, very exciting, all about committees. This is a series of conversations with Strata experts about how to build effective committees. The focus of our conversation will be around the human factors rather than the legal requirements, so that's our disclaimer. We invite you to pop any questions into the chat box, and if we don't get them today, we will collect them and hopefully either bring them back into the conversation in the next conversation or post something out individually. With me today, or returning today in particular, are two very special guests, Nicholas Abbey, give us a wave, Nick, and Christine Lisa with experience in, Nick has experience in large subdivisions and estates, and Catherine has experience in the multi-storey apartment living. And also with many projects, trying to get many projects done within her apartment as well. Catherine is also the first lot owner ever to be the president of SCA WA, and one day we'll have a conversation about that as well. Last month, I'll just recap, we had a conversation about why people volunteer to be on the committee, your experience that you had yourself about joining that committee, and what were the most important steps, with hindsight now, that a committee should do from day one. And I'll just say what those 5 important steps were. And the first of which is building relationships with the manager and the committee, so that team building aspect, having an induction pack for committee, and one which comes from the strata manager and one from the chair. So one's giving out the sort of the legal framework and all the things that are in place, and the committee chair is bringing in that committee charter of how we're going to operate together. Creating a handover from the outgoing committee to the incoming committee. So all the things that have been achieved and policies and processes that have been put in place, handing on the baton to the next committee to come along. Creating a work plan for the year. So setting out at the very start, the very first meeting, what it is you're trying to achieve for the year, and putting in obviously an action plan about trying to meet some of those ideas. And then keeping communication open and transparent, that also becomes part of the committee charter that flows from the committee, of course, across to the strata manager as well. So welcome back, Catherine and Nick, and thank you again for giving up your time and joining today. So we promised that of those 5 things, we would then unpack one of those each of our sessions over the next coming couple of months to just give a little bit more detail around what we thought each of those things might be. And I have to say that both Catherine and Nick have served on committees. Catherine, we just learned, has been involved in about 15 different schemes and therefore committees. Nick, not so many, but has had a number of different types of committees that have changed over that time as well. And but to get on, and of course, you know, the experiences are going to be, it'll be interesting to find out what experiences are similar, what experiences have been different, of course. And then, of course, as the 3 of us are going to be acting like a committee, how we're going to get on and build a relationship or keep our relationship by the end of the conversation. So this is the fiery one. So we're going to start with the most controversial one on that list, which, of course, is building relationships with the strata manager and the committee itself. So, Catherine, I'm going to jump straight into the fire with you.
Yep.
And because you've been involved with so many different apartment buildings, so many committees, you've had big agendas of things that you wanted to get completed. And I'm sure that meant that you had a lot of roadblocks, a lot of which were probably, you know, from the strata manager trying to get resolutions through. So what sort of experiences have you had?
It's varied and interesting. Everything from I once owned in a building where there was no really functioning committee and no strata manager, which was interesting, and then sort of left to one person to do a bit of bill paying once a month, and then to everything from very big buildings where you've got infighting and factions and you know, the communication lines are not clear and not working. So, you know, there's polar opposites. So the good example I have is where the committee was very clear about what they were doing and what they wanted to achieve with the building, and found the right resources for the strata manager and a building manager to go on that journey with them. Other times, you know, an example that is the opposite is where I'm sort of becoming a new owner and I pop in and I'm like, oh, okay, so this building operates entirely differently. We're not on the same journey. The building manager is doing one thing, the strata manager is doing the other thing. The committee is thinking they're doing something else, but they're failing generally in doing any of it. And there's a lot of the way we do things around here as a barrier. So I come in and often I'm asking questions and making what appears to be a nuisance of myself to understand this beast of a strata and to understand how this particular complex runs. A good example of that at the minute is I'm the current treasurer in my building, and I'm asking questions every time a bill hits my desk. I'm like, well, okay, can I see the contract? When does the contract run out? That seems like it's over market. That's this, that's that. And I'm asking questions. The way that our communication lines work here is I have to ask every single question through the secretary, and then the secretary then asks it directly to the strata manager. And so the secretary thinks I'm doubling up her work at the minute because we've got this communication protocol that we have to use. So there's so many aspects to it. But I think once you stop asking questions and once you stop being inquisitive about how things are running and what bills are being paid and, you know, what should we be doing in terms of the law as well, then you've got a problem, because then nobody does anything.
So that's interesting. So just on that, I would think that if the committee put in place a policy around how those bills, if you like, you know, so they're coming to you're asking those questions, and they're all very good and valid questions to ask. If a policy was developed that set out that here is the expectation around when a contract is entered into, or each time a bill comes to me, it cites what the contract amount is, it's got blah, 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 you know, so that there is that cross-checking that's done. Yes. So that would cut down the secretary's time, who is the volunteering here. So that's how I'd be looking at that going, how could we fix that? Is that, Nick, is that like what you would think of doing too?
Can I go back a few steps, Julie? In working with managers, I have to say that it's always been a journey, and I've learnt from every manager. And I suppose the pitfall is to actually focus on the manager as either the source of good practice or bad practice or somewhere in between, whereas we've always held up a mirror to ourselves. So in chairing a range of owners corporation committees, I've been much more mindful about what are we doing well, rather than focusing on the manager in the first place. And the main concern I've always had has been micromanagement. And where you end up with a committee populated by a whole lot of people trying to micromanage and generating conflict potentially with the manager. And I'm very respectful of managers in the sense that it's a tough job. I'm stating the obvious here. The tendency to try to be all things to all people, having to respond to the urgent always, which can always drive out the important, saying yes to people, taking on too much, feeling overwhelmed, so that over time, the main challenge in my experience has been how we work out the most effective roles we can all play. And that means starting to co-lead things, organising around the issues. What are the key issues in our owners corporation and our community? And in my case, I've worked with probably at least 10 different managers, 4 different owners corporation firms, and in both very small OCs of, you know, under 20 lots to an OC that I chaired that had over 800 lots. But the lessons were the same, regardless of the size, as to how you work out what we focus on by way of the issues and ultimately the outcomes that we hope to generate together.
So if I come back to Catherine, and just with our bill paying exercise, then do you think that leads back to when the tender for bringing on the strata manager in the first place, perhaps, if I pick up on Nick's point of saying that, you know, you don't want to micromanage, right? And some companies come with all the bells and whistles that will automatically do all that, and some companies don't. So I guess that the only time you kind of find that out is when you're tendering for a strata manager and that, you know, tender comes in. Is that something if you've been involved in that sort of process as well, are they the sorts of things that are being included in, is our experience being learnt on the coal front being replicated in how we now then search and appoint for strata managers?
Yes, I would agree with that. I would say, though, from my point of view as the treasurer, I think the treasurer is the really tricky job in strata, because you've got to know where all the money goes and you're accountable to every single lot owner, of course. And I like to do that thing where you trust but verify. So I see a bill come through, I ask the question the first time, and then I get my head around, oh, is there a contract? When's the contract coming due? Are we being charged the contract? Why is this over the contract? All that kind of stuff. Once I've got that set, then I'm okay. But I tell you, in my current building, I found, I can't even tell you how much overcharging I found just by doing that. And nobody's asked these questions for 10 years, apparently. So,
yes.
Yeah, and also in a changeover situation, you do find different ways of working between the two strata managers that will uncover contract flaws, all kinds of things. Back to your point, though, yes, I think, and same thing with what Nick's saying, I think you need to understand your kind of building, in, you know, what your building wants from their strata manager, and what your building wants from their building manager, if there is one, and what are we capable of doing as a strata council? What are we able to do ourselves? Some buildings don't want any work done at the strata council level. Some buildings want all of the work done at the strata council level, and then of course there's everything in between. So I find it most effective if the strata council is indeed doing all of the strategic stuff, the leading, the figuring out what they want to do, and they've then got a strata manager to competently back them up on that. If you leave it to the strata manager, as I've said before, the strata manager is not at the building, they're not at the complex, they don't know what's going on. So I think that it's important that the people who live there are leading the actual management.
Yes, yes. So Nick, you made the comment about micromanage, and, you know, from the other side of the fence, as in the strata manager side of the fence, that's probably the greater experience that we have would be micromanagement rather than the leadership, as you say, with the committee working out, you know, where they should be going and the difference. So our experience is going to be more at that micromanage. How do we unhook from that? Like, how do we build trust? What sort of things, how do we build trust with you so that you can leave us to do that job confidently, so that, Catherine, when you receive that invoice, you know some of those things are being done, even if it's not everything, but you know there's a certain trust of what is to there. How do we bridge that gap?
So what do I always look for in a good manager? How they work with both the committee and the community towards something that may be shared and achieved together. Likewise, an effective committee involves the owners corporation and the community, whatever their size may be of the owners corporation, in conversations about key issues and challenges, including at the AGM, so that we start organising around the issues and the outcomes. When we have first worked with a manager, it can take some time to extricate ourselves from, yes, the bread and butter issues, risk assessment, safety audits, maintenance plans, insurance, the budget for the next 12 months. You want to see the timely and efficient management and administration whether it's the notices of fees, overdue and unpaid fees, etc. But if the manager's role is confined to that, we don't then grow together. And that's what matters, how the committee and the manager are able to work around issues that matter. So how do we do that? I love community surveys, doesn't matter how small or big the owner's corporation is. And, you know, just using tools such as Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, listening widely and deeply, focusing on what we can all learn and develop, do and achieve together. And the responsibility to be informed about issues within an OC or the broader area impacting on the OC. It may not just be the common property. It may be the environment or, you know, like the road situation in terms of traffic management and road safety, and that might be a local government responsibility. But how do we start considering all information reasonably available, diverse opinions and data? And I suppose what this does, we move beyond a cosy relationship that sometimes can happen where the committee's a bit like a secret society working closely with the manager, but you think, where's the voice of lot owners and tenants? How are they being heard, including at the AGM, but not only at the AGM? So very quickly, what kind of community survey do? We look at the issues that matter, we rate their importance, we hear lot owners and residents' views and suggestions. And of course, that may then inform some kind of plan, including a strategic plan. I mean, keep it simple. It just might be a number of dot points about what we want to achieve over 12 months or 2 years, not confined to the maintenance plan, but perhaps broader goals. And if I just conclude on this point, what are the kinds of issues that we identify for a community survey? Maintenance of common property, obviously, the appearance of lots, road safety and car parking, drainage and stormwater control. It might be the local environment and how that's best protected or enhanced. But then we find issues like safety and security. Like in every survey that I've been associated with, whatever the size of the OC, residents and lot owners are identifying, well, safety and security, you know, including outside of the OC as well as within. The governance and the management of the OC, you know, how useful is the information? Are we just circulating newsletters that aren't really communicating anything meaningful? What are the residents' links with the committee and manager? How transparent? And then finally, there are issues like noise, you know, barking dogs, cooling units, local council services, because maybe the owners corporation committee and manager have some responsibility to engage local government to with a view to bringing about some improvements in particular services, neighbourly relations, and then finally plans for future improvement, you know, like community bulk purchasing, planting trees or whatever. So what's the point I'm making here? It means then that the manager, the committee and lot owners are thinking afresh about each other. What's their relationship? What's their value add? How do they work with each other to generate some significant outcomes and improvements within the OC or more broadly, simply because we've actually listened to each other? And that begins with a survey of lot owners. It's as simple as that.
I'm
going to ask the question. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, it sounds so strategic when Nick talks about these things, because that's my experience. Is I'm always down in the minutiae of who's doing what. Whose job is it to do what? Is it the building manager? Is it the strata manager? Is it our job? You know, that we seem to be having these constant demarcation disputes and everybody's trying to get it off their desk. Now, I understand that from a strata manager's point of view, they've got a narrow contract. They are to do those things on the contract and they don't get paid for a lot more. So I understand all that. But really, I spend most of my days figuring out whose job, who didn't do their job properly, why wasn't it done properly, who didn't follow it up, why wasn't it followed up? And, you know, I would love to be working at your strategic level, Nick, but that's really not my experience at this point.
No, and I was going to come in on exactly the same kind of level, Catherine, which is what, from a manager's, and you touched on it, is that the manager's contract is very narrow and only talks about the deliverables that Nick, you mentioned were the things that how you build trust, was do the things you're paid to do them on time and do them well. because that's the first step. If we can't demonstrate that we can do the basics, I mean, we're not going to build trust, you know, right from day one. So that's the first message. The second one is, and I have worked with a similar community like Nick's in doing those high strategic kind of rollouts as well. The big question is are you prepared to pay for them, pay for the service? So even if the strata management company is capable to provide the resources to support the journey of the committee, is the committee aware, and this might be different experiences for both of you, but is the committee aware that that is not included in the contract and is a separate price, and that, you know, they're seeking or being aware enough to say, provide us a quote for you to run that survey, you know, to process the results, to give us because it's not normal conversation. It's not a fee notice. It's not a notice about an AGM. It's not about, you know, so it's nothing that's already in our contract. These are all special and additional.
So in that regard, we place great emphasis on our annual report. And again, this can be in a very small OC or a large OC, so that lot owners were aware of the value add. What has changed in the community over the last 12 months? What are the goals for future improvement? What are the responsibilities of the manager and committee members and lot owners in working groups in generating those outcomes? And when you have an annual report, it means then there's transparency, there's visibility about achievement and about what we are contributing to together. I also want to emphasise that I don't want to make it sound highfalutin, that we're up in, you know, in the stratosphere with being incredibly strategic. It's very practical at the end of the day. But it does mean, though, that individual lot owners become aware of what they can do. Neighbours and small groups, including working groups, become aware of it. But most importantly, the OC and the community as a whole work out that, wow, we've actually developed traffic management, calming measures in partnership with local government, because the manager was acting as a conduit between the council and the committee to ensure that there was a flow of information, and that's now led to investment of council resources in our community. And on your point about the contract, at the end of the day, there's a premium attached, a high premium attached to efficiency and administration. But then we start renegotiating the contract. So with a large OC, we actually had a budget of up to $10,000 a year. I know this is a large OC, but of course it can also work at a small OC level, where the value-adding work of the manager, so organising the meetings of local government or organising community meetings where we were focusing on particular issues and thinking about how do we progress some shared goals, we recognised, and our community recognised, that we needed to pay extra for those services, obviously, and that we wanted the bread and butter issues addressed, but we also wanted to grow together professionally, and we wanted to co-lead our OC, and I say co-lead, lot owners, manager and committee members co-leading to bring about practical, tangible outcomes in the interest of all lot owners. Otherwise, we can just hear reports and get bogged down in trivia, and we never grow together to shape a more strategic agenda. But I hate using the word strategic because it can sound somewhat abstract, but I'm emphasising how practical this is. And it might be a small OC with half a page of dot points about what it wants to achieve over the next 2 years. So we're not just being retrospective and looking back and hearing about reports about what's happened. We're thinking always about what do we want to achieve. And that begins with a simple tool like a community survey.
I think that what I would pick up on your point, Nick, about the how you pay strata managers. So I find often in the committee, various committees I've been on, that because the committees, we're all volunteers and we're all doing our best, but we don't really know what we're doing at the end of the day. We don't really understand strata. We don't really understand all these bills and all the work that has to get done. We often don't have a frame of reference on which to decide. You know, so you've got 3 quotes. It might be 3 quotes for, you know, waterproofing work, or it might be 3 quotes for strata managers. What's the basis on what you decide? And I have seen, I can't tell you countless times, that the default decision is made on dollars. And that's not the basis to make the decision on. It should be on other factors. But in the absence of understanding having a context about how to make the decision otherwise, that's the default in many, many decisions. And I've seen it also with strata managers.
Mm.
And I agree with Nick. You need to pay more if you want your strata manager to do more work. And they're the ones with the skills and the access and all of that stuff. But don't go for the lowest quote either.
Yeah, yeah.
But even if you begin with the lowest quote, so long as there's an opportunity to grow together and to say, you know, and again, I can't overstate the significance of a simple thing like a survey. If residents are talking about safety and security or traffic management issues, well, who's going to deal with those issues? Are we going to just ignore them and just focus on hearing reports about the most immediate common property and maintenance issues? Yes, of course, that's core business. We get that. But if we ignore the other issues, residents, you know, over time, including for our annual reports, we raise expectations that more needs to be done. And then if there needs to be a slight increase in fees to pay for additional services, most residents, I find in my experience, will buy into that.
Yeah.
So long as they're seeing practical, tangible progress along the way. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I agree.
We're just about to run out of time, but I just did want to switch the conversation just slightly to the performance management of the strata manager, only because I wanted to share in particular my experience that when the committee wanted to or suggested that we have a performance review, of course, I thought, oh, this is it, I'm being sacked, you know. And it was really a nerve-wracking experience because I loved the committee I was working with and the work I was doing. Anyway, it turned out that it was not quite what I was expecting. And in fact, the whole thing, even from a company perspective, turned out to be a wonderful outcome. And we were able to have an honest conversation about what were the pain points, and the chair, because I would never have said that, I would have been too scared to say, oh, well, you're this, but they said, well, come on, you tell us what your pain points are for us and see how we could do better, because we've just spent half an hour telling you what yours are. And that really made a huge difference, because they also then understood what were the roadblocks for me. Things like, well, you want me to action this, but you haven't voted on it, and I don't hear from you from 7 days. I can't fulfill this unless you pass the ballot, things like that. Oh, okay, so we need to be signing up to a respond within a certain time, just like we're holding you to respond like in a certain time. And so having that open and frank conversation helped both parties enormously move forward to create really good, efficient committee operations in particular. Have either of you, had that? Catherine, perhaps start with you. Have you had that?
I haven't had it at a committee. We haven't been appraised as a committee. We probably should, actually. Every committee should. We did at one committee, we did have a sort of around the table, how do you think we're going kind of discussion, but it wasn't anything formal. But I did have a really good strata manager when I was in Sydney who would call after all the AGMs and call all the owners and get a net promoter score. Ask various questions and then get a net promoter score about how they would be going. So everybody probably knows a net promoter score is, would you recommend this company to your friends and family? And if you get anything above 0, you're doing pretty well.
I go, wow, not because of the bravery, but because they've got the time. I mean,
yeah, I know.
Trying to manage the company at the moment, I mean, is being hammered. They're just under COVID, particularly. It's just wow, they could do that. So, Nick, just a quick closing.
Yeah. So again, look, I mentioned the annual report. There are many ways in which that triangle of lot owners, the committee, and the manager, how they performance review each other. And there are formal ways of doing that, of course, including between the committee and the manager, and that ought to be done professionally. But also informally, I mentioned before the annual report. If the annual report provides the committee and the manager with the opportunity to really share the year's achievements and progress with the community, that is one of the most effective ways in which, and I don't mean an annual report it's got the finance report, etc., though that's bread and butter stuff, core business has to be there. I'm talking about the issues and the outcomes. What has actually changed, or what has been improved within our community, within our owners corporation. And that is the most effective and transparent, informal way of performance reviewing each other.
Yeah. So just as we close, I want to just pick up on the safety and security that you mentioned. The Australian Apartment Advocacy did a very large survey, over 3,000 people, and safety and security was top of the list. 90% of all of those people, the most important thing of living in multi-unit dwellings was safety and security. Now, for everyone that's on the call, go and have a look at your budgets and see how much is actually allocated for safety and security. Probably, I'd almost say it's probably not even on the budget as, you know, a line item. And if anything, it probably relates to the delivery of fobs and, you know, whatever. Anyway, that's a whole different conversation we could unpack because it is an extremely important issue, clearly, to owners and occupiers of building that somehow is not getting through to overall management in the way things are done, and the use of security guards when, you know, gates are broken. You know what I mean? Like, it is that well, there it is, there's the statistic, but where is the hardcore budget item that says we are actually paying attention to that? But,
fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's really fascinating. Well, again, very quick. That was a very quick 30 minutes. And great conversation again, and look forward to our next one, which, Amelia, I don't know if you know what the date of the next one is. I should know, sorry, but...
That's okay. I will just bring it up. The 5th of November.
5th of November. Excellent.
Yep.
So we'll all come dressed ready for Melbourne Cup. We won't be at it, but we will come dressed ready for Melbourne Cup. And and we'll unpack one of our other 5 top items that you zeroed in on last conversation. So thanks again for your time. Thanks for everyone else for turning up,